All right, we're all set. Okay, so for this week, we are talking about the Penn State turning a blind eye case study. And for our first question, it was, what action should the university have taken in 1998 in light of the fact that Sandusky was not prosecuted? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
So what I thought about that was that there wasn't enough evidence to press charges. So at that point, there was still like a slim chance that maybe he was innocent. I mean, obviously we know now that he wasn't, but at that point, you kind of have the issue of you might be potentially punishing an innocent person. So I can understand why at that point someone would kind of hold back and reserve judgment and maybe not take such a significant action. Mm-hmm. But I do think that at the very least, they should have, taken this action or taken this allegation seriously and removed his access to the facilities, because then at least you're kind of helping to prevent further issues from happening. But it's not like a completely thorough action. It's just kind of, this is the bare minimum that we could do to kind of say that we don't agree with this, say that we're taking this seriously.
Yeah.
Like you, I agree. They should have revoked his access or his privileges to have access to the football facilities or even just being on campus. Mm-hmm. I think they should have, I guess he could have been innocent at the time, but I think they should have reported it anyways, I think the school should have reported it instead of I think it was the mother.
Yeah.
The school could have shown more initiative in taking that instead of trying to potentially protect their brand. They could have requested an official investigation from outside sources, and like Christine said, they could have distanced themselves from Sandusky instead of trying to cover up the institution to protect themselves.
Yeah. I had pretty much the same thing, like revoking his privileges. And I think another big thing too would have been making sure that the board knew about it, because it seemed like later that was a huge thing, is that the board didn't know. And then the other thing I had was the police, and just how the fact that there was charges pressed, they should have kept a closer eye on things happening for the future. And kind of how our textbook was saying that's that would have been considered an institutional fail, because they didn't have enough evidence, but they didn't keep looking and collecting more in for the future. So, but yeah, for the most part, we all agree on that one, that he should have been revoked of his privileges from the campus, and to try to be proactive in stopping things from happening in the future. So our second one is, how should Penn State University treat the reputation of Joe Paterno going forward?
So I think that they should have accepted that while Joe may have been a good football coach, he wasn't a good person and a good leader. I think that he definitely failed in his leadership. His actions allowed Sandusky to continue abusing children, and the way that the university treats his reputation and his legacy going forward should reflect that.
I agree with that. He wasn't a good leader. Even though they may not like it, I think the university should refrain from associating with Paterno from here on out. Even though he had a great legacy as a football coach and on the football field, I think he was an enabler who allowed innocent children to continue to be victimized by someone who was a part of the faculty on campus. And so I just think they should kind of distance themselves from him. Just remove everything Joe Paterno to kind of help the rebuilding process.
Yeah. No, I had the same thing. They can talk, they can say that while he's a good coach and that, he did well with the players on the field and with the team, just the fact that he let something like this slide, is huge, and doesn't reflect well on the university at all. And I like, especially because like he saw all the warning signs and had all of like that information and still didn't do anything about it. So it's definitely something that like the university doesn't want as part of their reputation. So yeah, we definitely all agree on that one. So for the third one, it's was it fair to punish the football program for what happened?
I have to say, absolutely, yes, it was fair. There were so many people in that organization that willingly chose to hide evidence, and they covered it up. It was a crime, plain and simple, and essentially what they did allowed the abuse to continue, and they had a chance where they could have prevented it. I also think that part of what tarnishes the reputation of Penn State in this case isn't just that some of the crimes occurred on Penn State property, and they were committed by a former employee, because he did retire from the university in, Sandusky did, in 1999, before all of these allegations were brought to light.
Mm-hmm.
It's also that so many people chose to cover this up, and I think that ties in a lot to what we were talking about in the textbook this week, as far as like company or like corporate culture goes, and how sort of the actions of leaders reflect on the entire organization, and how when you have a big problem like this, it's usually not just one person. And in this case, it was several people who willingly, they exchanged those emails. They talked about this. They said, no, we're going to cover this up to try to protect the university. And it was absolutely the wrong action.
Yeah.
They essentially prioritized the reputation of the football program over children's safety.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with that. I kind of think it's tough. I look at it I agree with them punishing the football program that past administration, like Joe Paterno and the administration that was there while he was coach. But I also kind of see it as sort of unfair for like the current players who, missed out on scholarships to go to a good college, or they couldn't go to any bowl games. I just don't think it's fair to punish like current players for past administration mistakes. But in terms of punishment, I agree. I agree with the punishment that they had their wins and championships vacated. The NCAA doesn't really recognize Joe Paterno anymore as for his head coach wins. So I think that was kind of appropriate. But I don't know. Kind of being a big football fan, I'm kind of torn. I don't know. But yeah, I think in terms of the kids and the victims that were victimized, they should have been punished. But I think to go back on the people that were in charge back then and not current players or coaches.
Yeah, I understand. It's such a hard like situation because the whole program was, punished for it when it was mostly just like the coaching staff and the people in charge of the actual university. But again, I think that like the way that the university prioritized and put the football program on such a pedestal, that I feel like a lot of people were too scared to say anything. We're like, I don't want to say anything because, this is the football program, kind of that attitude. And obviously that's, an issue and became a huge issue. And I think like, again, it just kind of goes back to like how the textbook was talking about like warning signs. And there were so many, and I'm sure like some of the players saw warning signs too. So as much as like it stinks that they like couldn't continue to play and stuff like that, like I don't feel like they would all be innocent, because you have to know something's going on. At least that's my kind of viewpoint. But yeah, for the most part, we all agree that, yes, that they deserve their punishment, especially the coaching staff and the people in charge of it. And yeah, that's definitely one of those like hard situations, but
yeah.
So our fourth question is, what are the warning signs that an organization's leaders may be tempted to hide criminal and other unethical behavior?
So I would say that one of them is the way that they speak about the organization. Like you were saying, it was like this football program was put on a pedestal.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get in a situation like that, it does become really hard for people to bring forth criticisms and valid like concerns over unethical behavior. And essentially you get to a point where you're prioritizing loyalty over ethics. And I think that was something that really contributed to this situation with the football program, because people were afraid to come forward. They were afraid to like tell the truth about this. They kind of hid things because of the reputation of the football program. And then I think that another thing is how they treat scandals or ethical concerns. If they're willing to do something sketchy in a comparatively minor situation, then how far are they willing to go in a situation like this where it's something very serious and very major?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like to touch on, I think the big thing is just the loyalty and the fact that the football program is placed on such a high pedestal. I think success and the amount of resources coming into the program and that the money gets distributed throughout the university is enough to entice some of the leaders to come cover up criminal and unethical behavior. Like college football is $1 billion industry. So like the amount of money that these universities make from ticket sales, apparels, scheduling games, bowl games, TV deals, and on top of that, you have donors donating millions of dollars every year to these universities. I think a lot of the higher officials would be, pretty easily enticed to cover up any scandals or unethical behavior to protect all of this, money coming into their universities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's such like one of those like there's a saying, and it's absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I feel like that applies a lot to this situation with like, the president, and also with just the football program in general, about how, they were placed so high up on, the pedestal and the food chain that like you guys said, like no one wanted to come forward because, they are placed so high. And I'm sure like it talked about the janitor who saw it happening. Like I'm sure he was scared to lose his job if he said anything, and the fact that like that's a thing is really sad. Yeah. And I just think like CJ was saying, the officials and just how they're, likely to be enticed and bribed to not say anything and to just kind of ignore any situation that might be happening because the program does bring in a lot of money.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So for our fifth question, it was, how can organizations encourage followers and leaders to speak up when they witness wrongdoing?
So I had 3 things for this. I think the first thing is to establish standards of ethics and to talk about them frequently. Don't just let it be, something that's in a pamphlet that nobody ever reads and it's, never talked about again until you get into a crisis situation like this. The second thing was to promote ethical leaders, essentially look at who's doing a good job as a leader of considering ethical issues as well as every other part of being a leader and make sure that they're promoted. And then finally, don't punish whistleblowers. Like you were saying, that janitor was probably terrified that he was going to lose his job if he came forward with this. And when you get to a point where you're saying, you can either have ethical concerns or you can keep your job, I think that is a huge, huge issue.
Yeah.
So I pretty much have those 3 points. I'll add maybe they could schedule in quarterly meetings that cover the importance of reporting also. They should all, I think if someone does report something to, like, say, their superior, that superior shouldn't be afraid to report it to not just maybe his higher up, but to like the proper authorities. That way they can maybe better deal with the situation or any kind of criminal activity that may be going on. Colleges have like a lot of issue with all kinds of sexual assaults that have a hard time getting reported. It's kind of crazy that these types of assaults keep going, getting kind of, I guess, swept under the rug.
Yeah. Yeah. I had pretty much the same answers as well. Especially with like the setting the like ethical standards. I think it's so important to like have those standards and then have like your staff prepared for what to do when something unethical happens. Because you can, talk about your standards and what you want to see happen and all that kind of thing. But if you don't like prepare people for like what to do in an unexpected situation, all those standards are basically going to go out the window because it's like, well, they're just not following them. So I think, yeah, kind of like I liked what you said, CJ, about like setting, like quarterly or monthly meetings to like go over everything that like needs to be done and kind of keep updated. One of my other things is it kind of goes off of what you were saying, Christine, about ethical leaders, was having like more accountability between like the president and the board. Because that was obviously like a huge issue is that, the president knew these things were happening but didn't tell the board. And so all this miscommunication and covering up. So like if you have those ethical leaders and then have a good like foundation of accountability, I think that's a huge way to like cut down on any unethical problems that might arise and being prepared to deal with them. But and then the sixth one was, what crisis leadership lessons do you take from this case?
So actually what I had for this answer ties in a lot to what you were just saying, Becky, about being prepared. I said that preparation is everything, and also not just having a plan to address crisis, but taking steps to prevent it in the first place. So things like you guys were mentioning about having those quarterly meetings, stuff like that, like CJ was saying. Taking steps to create a strong ethical organizational culture to prevent a lot of the issues in the first place, and also to take responsibility and do the right thing, to accept the consequences, and to not lose sight of the true priorities in life.
Yeah.
So again, I had some of those points, but I learned like, when people put the human biases and special interests first, I mean, like the Sandusky case is a prime example of, institutional failures that can happen, not just, at a football program or university, but anywhere. The Sandusky case could have been avoided if, if people weren't afraid to come forth and, speak up when they see something. I think it's just the culture that we have where people are more afraid of, people with power because, you don't want to lose your job or position. I guess I'll go back to, scheduling those quarterly or monthly meetings. I mean, set a plan in place so that everybody has kind of like a set guideline of what to follow and make sure that everyone knows who they should report to or, what kind of thing they should be looking for, look for the danger signs. Goes with the crisis prevention saying too that's been of late. If you see something, say something. We all have a part to play, and things are only going to get better if everyone can step up without fear of any ramifications coming down on them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Mine were a lot like yours, Christine, where it was like having that preparedness for any situation and kind of just knowing that while some of these situations seem like extremes, that they're not necessarily, and like they are things that you might have to deal with as a leader. And so being able to be prepared for those things and, not freak out and be able to handle them in such a way that like you kind of work not only yourself, but your entire team, like through a situation like that. I think that's really important. And then I think too, my other like big thing was like the accountability thing and just making sure that even like now, if you're in any type of leadership position, like having that accountability to make sure that like you're still on the right track and you're still like setting ethical standards for yourself based on like your situations. So those were my kind of things. Well, yeah, I think for the most part for this, we agreed on quite a bit of just like the situations in general and how things should have been handled. And I really liked, Christine, like your points about setting up ethical leaders and making sure that you're setting like a good foundation for any type of work that you do. Sorry, my words, I'm just rambling. But yeah, so that's kind of it for us. Are you guys good for same time next week, Thursday at 1?
Yep, that works for me.
Okay, and then who wants to lead next week?
My turn again.
Okay. All right. So CJ next week at 1 on Thursday.
All right. See you guys next week.
See ya.